So you're a new driver, you're 17 years old, you just bought your first car, or you're a 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old and you just paid your car off and you want to start tinkering with it and modifying it a little bit. This is the video for you. Definitely keep watching, or let's get right into it. So if you're a current subscriber or you've been following our channel, you know that we are not only an automotive repair and maintenance channel, we are also a modification channel. I am myself an ASE certified master technician. I also have the L1 certification, which is the advanced level specialist, meaning I know cars very well. Now, I am not one of those mechanics that hates working on modified cars. In fact, I'm the opposite. I love modifying cars, and that's why I wanted to make this video. So this video is going to be good for you, like I said, whether you are a brand new driver and you just bought your first car, or if you're an older guy or gal and you want to start getting into cars. I'm going to kind of give you a guide, if you will, of the order that I usually do things in when I'm looking to modify a car. You don't have to follow this by the book. You don't have to go in the exact order that I do. But if you've seen some of my other projects, whether it be this Mustang, this Lexus, my 275,000 mile Jeep outside, I kind of follow the same steps with every single one of my cars when it comes to modifying them. So I made a quick guide. It's going to be divided into 6 chapters, and I hope you guys enjoy it, and hopefully it helps some of you, because I see this this topic searched a lot: how to modify a car, how to, I'm going to show you exactly how I do it and how I've been doing it since I was 15 years old, and I am now at the ripe age of 31. So I have been tinkering with cars now for going on 16 years. Alright guys, so for chapter 1, if your car is 3 years old or newer, or say less than 40,000 miles, you can kind of skip this chapter because it's really not going to have anything to do with what you're going to have to be doing. But if you have an older car, like I said, over 3 years old, over 30,000 miles, you're going to want to go over this car from bumper to bumper. You're going to want to pop the hood. You're going to want to check your oil, pull your dipstick, check your oil. You're going to want to check your transmission fluid. You're going to want to check your coolant, check your filters, check your belts, hoses, everything. You want a nice, strong foundation to start off with. You don't want to start modifying a car that needs maintenance or needs repairs. You're going to want to check your front end, jack it up, check the wheels, make sure everything's tight, check your brakes, check your hub bearings, get under the car, check for leaks, check your exhaust, check the car over. You want a nice, strong foundation. Maintenance is key, especially if you're going to be modifying this car. You're going to be adding power to it. You're going to be stressing the suspension with aftermarket components. You want to make sure that everything is going to be up to the task. You want a nice, strong foundation. If you have a manual transmission car, you're going to want to check your clutch. Make sure that clutch isn't slipping. If you're going to be adding power, you're going to want that clutch to be able to grab. You're going to want to check your shifter. Make sure you go into all 5, 6 gears nice and smoothly. When you're in gear, try to wiggle the shifter side to side. If it moves, it's time for shifter bushings, and this would be a great time to upgrade to some polyurethane shifter bushings and maybe a short throw shift kit, just to give you that better shift feel. Because when you're driving a manual transmission, shifter feel is super important. If you have loose shifter bushings, you can miss a shift. You could do what we call the money shift and really screw some things up. So make sure your clutch is good. Make sure your shifter bushings is good. Make sure your trans shift's nice. Check all your fluids. Check all your filters. Like I said, transmission, power steering, engine oil, coolant. Go over the whole car. Make sure it's ready to go. Now, I want to take this opportunity to use this Mustang here as an example for chapter 1. This is a 2013 and it has about 60,000 miles on it. And when we bought it, I could not get this thing to pass inspection. It was a bear. I had to make a couple repairs under here. We had to do what's known as the canister purge valve. That is what purges the evaporative emissions out of the charcoal canister to be reburned, because it was throwing a code for that and it would not run the readiness monitor for the evaporative system because of that. So we went ahead and we replaced that, and we did some fluids. We did our coolant. We did some spark plugs, and after we kind of got everything situated, then we started modifying it. So now we have it sitting on a nice set of coilovers, and this car is ready for the next step in the mod process, because we followed our tried and true process here, and we got the car ready as a nice strong foundation to build off of. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 are sort of interchangeable. So I'm going to start with Chapter 2. This is the way that I usually do it, but as mentioned before, you can kind of flip-flop them. So what I chose for Chapter 2 is going to be appearance, exterior appearance that is, and what better way to start than aftermarket wheels. Aftermarket wheels are a huge way to make your car stand out and look different, and not only look different, but drive different. Depending on the design or the manufacturing process of the wheels that you get, you can actually get bigger, wider wheels that weigh less. Less weight means less unsprung mass, and your car is going to handle better, it's going to have steer in better, and the engine is going to be able to drive them better because they are lighter. Now, there are several different kinds of wheels that you can get. If you are on a budget, you're going to want to look at some cast wheels. Now, the problem with cast wheels is they are heavy, and they are also weak, meaning they're not going to be as strong as a forged wheel. Now, the middle of the road wheel, and that is actually what we went with here, is what they call roto-forged. So the barrel of the wheel, which is not the front, but the barrel, the inside that the tire sits on, is basically, it's more or less forged, but the outside of the wheel is cast. So you get the benefits of a forged wheel, and they're not that much more expensive than a cast. Now these wheels here, I went a 1/2 inch wider in the front and in the back so I could put some bigger tires on it to give me some more traction, and they were actually several pounds lighter than the original wheels, which is good because, like I said, that is less unsprung mass and that is less weight that the engine now has to try to overcome to push the car forward. So now that we went over wheel types, we now have to think about fitment. What kind of fitment do you want? Do you want flush, which is what I would consider this? Do you want tucked? Do you want them to tuck into the fender? Do you want poke? Do you want them to poke out? Or do you want what's known as hella flush, which is where you have to then go ahead and start rolling fenders and cambering them a little bit to get them to fit just right? And the way that you dial that in is what is known as offset. So what I recommend you do is join some forums, do some Google searches, and figure out what offsets work best for your car for the fitment that you're going off of. Offset is the single most important aspect in wheel fitment. If your offset is off, it's going to look like crap, and you're going to either need to run spacers or you're going to have to get completely different wheels if they poke out too far. So if you are looking for wheels, whether you're getting them new or used, make sure that they are the correct offset for the fitment that you are looking for. These wheels are, I believe, 32 millimeter offset positive, so 32 millimeters positive. Offset is how far the wheel pokes out or gets sucked in relation to the hub. So these, like I said, they're 32 millimeters front and rear. I didn't need to run any camber, and if you look down the side of my car, like I said, I would consider this flush fitment. This isn't hella flush. I didn't need to go ahead and roll fenders or damage the body or modify anything on the body to make these fit the way I wanted to. And that's good, because once you start rolling fenders, you risk cracking the paint, and you're kind of starting to modify the body in a way that I think is untasteful. Again, if you want hella flush, by all means, look up how to roll your fenders. If you do it right, it can be done correctly without damaging the paint, but that can always happen when you're doing that. So now that you picked a set of rims that you like, you got the right offset that you like, and you're confident that your fitment is going to look good, now it's time to start thinking about the rubber that is literally going to be touching the road and pushing your car forward. You need to think to yourself, how am I going to be driving this car, and what conditions am I going to be driving it in? And you're going to want to pick a tire that is going to work best for you. In our case, we went with a super high performance all-season Continental tire. I didn't want to go full out summer tire because I do drive this car in the winter when there's no salt on the road. For example, it was probably 30 degrees when I woke up this morning, and I drove this to work today because, like I said, there's no salt on the road. If I had a summer tire on this, it's not ideal because summer tires are very soft and they get hard when they get cold, and they get flat spots, and they don't work well in cold temperatures. So if this is going to be a car that you're going to be strictly driving in the summer, by all means, super high performance summer tire, go for it. If this is something you're going to be driving in the winter months, definitely get an all season. You can get a super high performance all season just because it's going to perform better in the heat, but it's also going to let the car be drivable when it's cold out. They're still not going to be great in snow, so do bear that in mind. If you live in a snowy climate, you might want to put some snow tires on your factory wheels just to throw them on in the winter. I personally, like I said, I don't do that because if there's snow on the ground, this car doesn't go out. But if it's your only car, definitely have a second set of tires for the winter if you live in a snowy climate. So I like getting the big things out of the way first, and then I kind of start adding my add-ons. So that's why I did wheels first. So from wheels, I like to get my cars tinted. This car is very tinted. It's 20% driver's side front, passenger side front, back wheel or back windows, and the very rear window. And then I have 35% on the windshield. So the whole car is tinted, and I just think that adds to the look of the car. Especially like a silver car or a black car. I like the tinted windows. I like the contrast, or even a white car like our Mustang here. It is also tinted. That is going to make the car look better. It's going to protect the interior from the rays of the sun. If you get a ceramic tint, that's what this has. This is ceramic, and it's going to increase your driving pleasure because you're not going to have the sun blaring in your face and blinding you when you're going down the road, and it's going to give you some privacy. So I always tint my windows on all of my cars. It's just something that I've always done. If you look on my channel, just about every single car that I've had has been tinted, and just look at it. It speaks for itself. So from there, I'll start looking at different things I can do to the car, such as, say, lighting. If I don't have HID or LEDs from the factory, I'll upgrade to them. I'll add lip kits like we have here. We have a Tom's Racing carbon fiber lip kit. I'll start, looking around the car, seeing what else I can do to it. Now, a modification doesn't have to be an aftermarket part. If you have a lower trim level car and you wanted to add an accessory or a part from the higher trim level, go ahead, order that part, put it on your car. Just because the higher trim came with it doesn't mean that you can't put it on your car. We did that with our TRD Camry. We added the piano black door pillar trims from the XSE, and we did a couple of other things like the charger that goes in the center console, the Qi charger for your cell phone. We added that, and we added several things that a higher trim car would have came with that ours didn't, and it made us enjoy the car that much more. Now, to end chapter 2 here, I just want to say the sky is the limit. You can make your car look however you want. Don't let anybody tell you what looks good and what doesn't look good. Listen to yourself. What you do, what you want to do to your car, and don't worry about what anybody else says. I always say opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. Now, like I said before, chapter 2 and chapter 3 can kind of be interchanged, and you're going to see why in just a second. For chapter 3, we are going to talk suspension. That is whether you want to do an appearance build, or you want a performance build, or you want a mix of both. So to start off, I'm going to go ahead and mention lowering springs. Lowering springs are springs that you add to your factory suspension, so your factory strut and your factory shock. They don't really do much for performance. They kind of give you a harsher ride, and they put the factory struts and shocks under more stress because you're taking them out of their efficiency range to lower the car. Now, I've had several cars where I didn't really care about, how well it drove. So my Scion FRS and my Subaru BRZ, I ran lowering springs on them for, 20, 30, 40,000 miles with no problems. But then this Mustang here that we bought with lowering springs on it had severely blown front struts because of the springs. So if you are going to go with lowering springs, do bear in mind that you may need to replace the struts sooner than later. Now, your next option, which is what we opted to go with on both of our cars here, is a coilover suspension. A coilover suspension replaces the whole shock and strut and spring assembly that is on your car from the factory with an adjustable coilover. I'm going to go ahead and put a picture of one right here. And what that basically allows you to do is fine-tune the suspension for the way you want it. So for both of our cars here, we have 24-way adjustable front dampers, meaning we have 24 different levels of stiffness that we have to pick from. And the height adjustment, I could slam this thing or I could raise it. The sky's the limit. I could make these cars sit however I want. And that is what I like about coilovers. Now, do bear in mind when you are going to buy a coilover, you are going to want to do some research on spring rates. Make sure that you pick the correct spring rate for the ride that you want. If you want a stiffer ride, a higher spring rate is the way to go. If you want a ride that is going to be as close to factory as possible, then you want a softer spring rate. I recommend doing some research, seeing what other guys do for their cars and what their goals are, and if your goals line up with theirs, that's your starting point. So we went with 16 kilogram springs in the front and 14 kilogram springs in the rear on this, and I believe we did 9 kilogram in the front on this and 7 in the rear. I kind of forget what we did on the Mustang, but both of these cars ride exactly how we wanted and exactly how we expect them to ride. Now, your third option is going to be the Hail Mary option and the also most expensive option, and that is an airbag suspension. Now, an airbag suspension is very complicated because you need to add multiple components to the car to make them work. You need to run an air compressor, you need an air tank, you need an air management system, and then you have to run power all the way to the trunk for your compressor, and you have to run air lines from your trunk up to the air management and then to every single corner of the car. So yes, it's the most expensive. Yes, it's probably the best option because it's adjustable on the fly. You hit a button, you can raise it, you hit a button, you can lower it, but it's also the most expensive and the most invasive. If you don't want to be drilling holes in your car, running air lines, and really modifying things to make it work right, that's not going to be the option for you. And I personally, I don't like bags because, number one, if a bag fails, you're stuck on the side of the road. There's no moving the car because it's literally going to be sitting on the bump stops. And to make them work right in certain cars, you really have to start modifying stuff. You have to start trimming parts of the body or modifying the strut tower so when the upper control arms come all the way up at full drop, they're not resting on the body. And it's very invasive to the car, and it's just, in my opinion, not practical. So now that you went ahead and picked the suspension system that works best for you, whether that's springs, coilovers, or air, it is now time to fortify the suspension to then go ahead and be able to handle the stiffer shocks, the stiffer struts, and the lower ride height. There are several things you're going to want to look at. Number one, which is something that we did on this car, is polyurethane lower control arm bushings. Your factory control arm bushings are usually fluid filled. In the case of this Lexus, they're fluid filled, and they inherently allow flex. Now, they are designed for the factory suspension components. When you stiffen your shock absorber with a coilover or a lowering spring, that flex point is going to move downward, and that is going to go to the lower control arm. So you're going to have more deflection in the front end during braking and cornering, and you're going to feel that, and you're also going to see that in how your tires wear. So in this case, we went with Figs Racing lower control arm bushings, and we also had to do Figs rear camber arms because that is another thing you need to take into effect. When you're lowering the car, you're taking the alignment out of the factory specification. And a lot of times, like this car, for example, from the factory, rear camber is not adjustable. So you need to add the components to go ahead and be able to do that. And that is going to be the case with a lot of the modifications you're doing on your car. You need to do what is known as supporting mods to support your main modification. So yes, we wanted coilovers on this. Yes, we wanted the car to drive right. And yes, we did not want the car to blow through tires because the alignment was out. So we did everything that we needed to do to get this particular car planted and ready to go. This car, I can hop in it and drive. The steering wheel's straight. It drives super nice. It's probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches lower, and it rides like a factory car. And that realistically is your goal. You want your car to ride as close to stock as possible while modifying it and making it look better. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump right into chapter 4. So my first go-to mod on just about any car that I buy is a cold air intake. Now, a lot of people will say, hey, Stefan, cold air intakes don't add power. And in 99% of the case, you're 100% right. But they do add a sound that is unmatched. I personally like induction sound better than I like exhaust sound because the induction noise is quiet when you're off the throttle and loud when you're on it. Now, there are several different types of intakes that you can buy for your car. First and foremost being the short ram air intake. In most cases, I don't recommend those because a short ram air intake is basically putting the air filter right here in the engine compartment, and that is where it's going to be sucking hot air for the engine to burn. Hot air is less dense, and those, yes, will 100% hurt power. A proper cold air intake is going to be routed away from the engine and have some sort of a heat shield up front where that filter is to keep the hot air away from the filter and let the cold air come in. Now, in the case of this Lexus, the factory airbox is actually designed so well that there really aren't any companies that make an upgraded airbox for it. So what we used was basically we used a high flow drop-in air filter, which is also a great option. That's going to give you some more power and some more throttle response, and you're still going to have all of your factory components in place. And we also added a heat shield and a carbon fiber intake tube, and what that is going to do is it's more of an appearance mod than anything, but the RR Racing intake tube that we used actually moves the breathers from the intake tube and it moves them to a separate little breather filter, and that is going to keep hydrocarbons from entering your engine to be reburned because that is actually going to hurt power and it's going to create carbon buildup in your engine. So now that we talked about the intake, let's talk a little bit more about the intake. I always install an oil catch can on every one of my cars. The PCV, or the positive crankcase ventilation system, is one of the first emission devices ever created. Now, what that does is it captures the blow-by and the hydrocarbons that are in the crankcase, and it sucks them up into the intake to be reburned so they don't exit into the atmosphere. Now, that is going to completely coat your intake with oil. Now, if you have a direct injected car, this is very bad because it's going to create carbon buildup and gum up your intake valves. What an air oil separator or a catch can is going to do is catch those vapors before they get reburned, and it's going to pull the oil out of them. Now, you do have to drain it periodically, so if you're not the kind of person that likes to pop your hood and get your hands dirty, I would steer away from that. But if you were watching this video, you're probably not that kind of person, so definitely get a catch can. If you really want to start modifying your car, if your car has enough aftermarket support or has different models of that car from the factory, you can do what's known as an intake manifold swap too, and that is actually super common here on the 5-liter Coyote Mustang. What a lot of guys will do is they will take the intake manifold from, say, a Shelby GT350 or a 2018 onward Mustang GT, and they'll put them on their first and second gen Coyote engines, and what that's going to allow them to do is rev higher and make more power. That is actually what we did on our Mustang GT when we had it, and it was fantastic. But then you're getting into the realm of needing a tune, and you're really starting to modify things. So if you're a beginner, I, again, probably wouldn't do that. I would stick to the basics, but I did feel that it was necessary to mention that. So now that we're done with the intake, let's talk about exhaust. There is a ton of different exhaust systems that you can buy for a car. You have an axle back, which is basically from the axle back. It's usually just the mufflers. You have a cat back, which is from the catalytic converter back, which will replace the mufflers and the mid pipe. Now, a mid pipe is another thing you can do, but a cat back is a mid pipe and an axle back put together. Now, you also have on certain cars, you're going to have front pipes, you're going to have down pipes, and you're going to have all kinds of different exhaust components. So look up your car, see what kind of exhaust it has, and see what kind of aftermarket components they make. Now, do bear in mind, you could do headers, but if you do headers, again, just like the intake manifold, you're getting into the whole needing a tune area, and if you're a beginner, that you might not want to do that. So if you want some performance and some sound, go ahead and get an axle or a cat back. If you're just interested in a little bit of bark, an axle back is the way to go. And if you're Hail Mary, do the headers, do the front pipe, down pipe, mid pipe, axle back, cat back, whatever. You could replace the whole system, tune the car, and then you're really going to be cranking out some power. Now, another thing that you can do is forced induction. I really like forced induction on smaller engines. So my Subaru BRZ, like I mentioned before, I boosted that. I was only running 10 pounds, but it made a ton of power because it had 12.5-to-1 compression, which was my limiting factor in the amount of boost that I could run. But if you're going to be boosting your car, you're 100% going to need a tune, and you're 100% going to need supporting mods. Whether that is a clutch, like I mentioned before, or if you really want to make some power, you're going to need a built engine. You're going to need to pull your engine out, pull the heads, pull the crank, pull the pistons and rods, and you're going to have to upgrade to some forged internals and probably some lower compression to handle the boost. So again, turbocharging or supercharging or forced induction is more of an in-depth modification that's going to cost a whole lot of money, and it's going to take away from the daily ability of the car, because it's really, once you start doing stuff like that, you don't have a street car anymore. So in chapter 4, we talked about adding power to your car. So what better way to start chapter 5 than how do you stop all of that extra power that you added? Your brakes. So you have to decide what route you want to go with your braking system. What most people will do, and what I've traditionally almost always done, is I buy upgraded versions of the factory brakes. So I'll buy, say, drilled and slotted rotors, and I'll upgrade to a high-performance ceramic pad and maybe do some braided stainless steel lines to give you a better pedal feel. Now, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be perfect for you. But if you're adding a ton of power with forced induction like we were talking about before, you're going to want to get a big brake kit. Now, in the case of our Lexus and our Mustang here, these basically came with factory big brake kits. We have 6-piston calipers and 15.5-inch rotors here. And on the Mustang, we have, I believe, the 13-inch rotors with 4-piston calipers, and they're both Brembos. So these cars came with big brake kits from the factory. And back to one of my other points where I mentioned that upgrades don't have to be, or modifications don't have to be aftermarket. If you have a V6 Mustang or a Lexus GS350 and you are adding power, you're boosting it, or you're doing something to it that you need more stopping power, you can go ahead and buy the big brake kit that the car came with from the factory in its upgraded form and retrofit them to your car. That is the route that I would go. But if your car is a car that didn't have a factory big brake kit, there are plenty of options. You can go with Willwood, you go with Brembo. Just do your research, see what they offer for your car, and go ahead and upgrade them. Now, another great mod for your brakes that is really, 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 really cheap is upgrading to DOT4 brake fluid. DOT4 brake fluid is backwards compatible with DOT3, which is why I'm not mentioning DOT 5.1 or anything like that, because those you need a complete flush. Dot 3 and Dot 4 are backwards compatible, but Dot 4 is going to give you a higher boiling point. So basically what that means is you're going to be able to get these brakes hotter and use them for longer before that brake fluid boils. And that's great for stopping. Obviously, you don't want your brake fluid to boil. That would not be good. Now, the only thing you need to be aware of with Dot 4, it is more hygroscopic than Dot 3. So it's going to absorb moisture from the atmosphere faster. So you are going to have to change it more often. I would change your brake fluid if you have Dot 4 every 2 years, and your brake system will love you forever. Now, the inside of your car is where you're going to be spending most of your time with the car. You're going to be sitting in the driver's seat driving it. So you definitely want to make it a nice place to be. If your car did not come with leather and you want to add it, by all means, you can do cat skins leather. Basically, you take your seat covers off, like the actual cover, you take it off and you install the leather onto it. That'll give you a nice leather interior. We actually did a video of reupholstering a Acura car seat. So that would actually be a very similar process. But that is something that you can do to make your interior more you. I always like to do audio and infotainment upgrades. So not with this car, because this car out of the box with the Mark Levinson system is unbelievable. But in other cars that I've owned, I've always upgraded the head unit to something with a touchscreen if it didn't have it. And something that is going to allow me to add an external amplifier, such as a monoblock for a subwoofer, and then maybe a 4-channel to run some upgraded door speakers, just to make your enjoyment of the car better in the musical aspect, because a lot of these cars come with really junky sound systems. Every one of these things that I'm mentioning in all of these chapters, I have a video on how to do this stuff. This is stuff that we do on this channel all the time. So if you want to check out the channel, scroll through my videos, you'll see everything that I've talked about in this video we've done here on the channel. But other than that, I think we've touched all of our bases here. We've gone through 6 chapters of the most common things that I see people do to their cars, and I just kind of ordered them in the way I do it, and I think it's the most logical way to do it. You can disagree with me, you can do it however you want. But hopefully this video helped you, and hopefully you enjoyed it. So please like, share, and subscribe. Comment down below. Let me know what kind of modifications you guys have to your cars, and if you agree with me, disagree with me, think I should do it in a different order. Let me know what you think. I like to interact with you guys. It brings joy to me knowing that you guys like what we're doing here and have questions and have suggestions. So again, like, share, and subscribe. Comment down below, and we'll see you next time.